Gupta, I'd like to start with you. In regards to personal information. You've made comment, no personal information is collected. Is gender an identifier?
Is gender an identifier? Gender standing alone with nothing else?
How about if we included age? Would that be an identifier, those two together? How about ethnicity, if we included those three elements? Are those things that can be used to identify an individual?
I think I take your point, and you're right. I mean, a constellation of data can certainly be used to identify someone without their name, and the CFPB is very concerned about that, and that's why if you read the GAO report, you'll see that they have a data intake team that carefully scrubs the data before it even enters the Bureau and is disseminated to ensure that you don't have the constellation of data that can be assembled to actually identify anyone.
Well, interestingly, Mr. Gupta, under the CFPB with the NMBD, they do require the collection of gender, age, and ethnicity. Mr. Calabria, would you like to maybe comment on that?
Well, again, I would agree that only a small number of information is needed to identify people. I do want to emphasize, as I pointed out in my testimony, as the Federal Reserve Inspector General pointed out, a significant amount of the CFPB data collection is maintained by contractors on cloud computing, which in my opinion, granted, not a tech expert, but leaves it particularly vulnerable to hacking. So I would certainly encourage the CFPB to bring more of that data. Here, I'm going to say it for a second. Cato Institute, Mark Calabria encourages less use of contractors, more government employees. So in this case.
Does GAO report that CFP does not have the security protocols in place to be able to secure this data? Does that secure you?
That is correct, and that is a very big concern of mine, the security of this data.
You know, if I could follow up again with you, Doctor, for a long time I've held the belief that a lot of the regulatory bodies, the heart may be in the right place, but we need to be able to look at outcomes. And I get a general sense, going back to Speaker Gingrich's point, that we actually have an institution right now through the CFPB that is completely off the books. Congress has no real control to be able to actually control it, to be able to direct it. Do you have a sense that we have a system in place that is continuing to build, that is designed to be able to find and punish rather than help and improve?
So let me first say, and I mean, there's a fair amount of work in the psychology literature about when people feel like that they're wrapped up in a cause and self-righteous, and I think that certainly the CFPB's attitude is we are a crusade. We're here to protect the consumer. We're going to fix the financial crisis, and we saw the same thing in the intelligence community after 9/11. When you get caught up in this mentality, you get blinders, you get tunnel vision. A lot of psychology research that I think clearly demonstrates that. And so what you need, and again, I would reference one of the citations in my testimony from something by Cass Sunstein, of all people, who really argued that you need to have procedures and checks in place, yes, sir, to Mr. Cordray. And I think that's a real problem. None of us have all the answers, and you lack this institution for this dialogue and this back and forth and this give and take. You need that. In other places that don't have this, don't do well. As was mentioned, a number of other agencies, look at OFEO, who was the regulator for Fannie and Freddie, single director. We saw how that turned out. So again, the attitude that you can't have this sort of give and take, I think is critically important. I'll also note the argument you often hear is we need a single director, so does it captured by the industry? Well, I'm not a mathematician, but the last I checked, I think it would be easier to capture one person than it would to capture, say, 5.
One thing that genuinely concerns me about this, if we were to apply the same rules to the CFPB that they are trying to apply to everyone else, if we were getting ready to make a mortgage, and again, go back to the comments in terms of identifiers about gender, age, ethnicity, in determining and making a loan, they're collecting this data with no consumer knowledge. How would the CFPB address a private sector entity in doing that?
Well, let me make two quick points since we're out of time. First of all, the JP Morgan example, I can choose not to use JP Morgan, and if I do, I can sue them if they distribute my data in a personal way. And plus, they suffer. Target took a big hit. You don't see any of this with the federal government in terms of these corrections. But lastly, I want to say we don't have to wonder how this works. The HMDA is an example of where there's not personally identifiable information, but you can link it to courthouse records to figure out the identity. It's not that hard.
The gentleman's time has expired.